Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have on the panel with me Praphul and Ashwini, two fantastic entrepreneurs who will share a little bit about their journey. So, with that, let's jump into the conversation. Welcome, Ashwini. Welcome, Praphul.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. Thanks for having us.
So, may I invite each of you to share a little bit about your journey and where you are on the customer journey? And Ashwini, if you might want to go first.
Sure. Um, so, as we're an AI startup, Mad Street 10, we've been in the market with our AI platform for about 5 years now, a little over that. Um, we started off as our goal was essentially to make in really large scale enterprises across the globe AI native, right? We've already seen the desktop transformation companies adopting that, then the mobile transformation, and then everybody moving to the cloud. And over the last 5 years, we've had a very strong belief that companies are all large scale enterprises are going to move to AI next, right? And AI transformation is what the next decade is really going to look like. And in order to prepare for that transformation, we saw an opportunity to do two, three things, right? One, equip very specific verticals with very specific types of AI to be able to automate all kinds of functions inside their company, right? And while we started off with the retail industry under the name View.ai, over the course of the last couple of years, we've expanded across healthcare, pharma, media, entertainment, finance, and more, right? Our goal from day zero was to be kind of a general purpose AI platform rather than a platform that solves point solutions for companies around the world. And this journey automatically meant that we had to be very clear about who our customer was, right? And early in the days, and I think one of the most important things is to have a lot of clarity around segment. And for us, we needed to prove ourselves with one segment before we could kind of repeat that playbook across all other types of verticals. And so we started off with retail, and we pretty much went behind the top five retail companies in every geography, very much counter to the wisdom that you should start at one country. Instead, we picked the top five in LATAM, the top five in Europe, the top five in the US, the top five in Asia. And we kind of, because it was important for us to look at the market very holistically and say, who do we believe is going to invest in AI, right? And computer vision and image recognition, video recognition. And we were very clear that it was a little ahead of the curve. And so it was important for us to find the perfect profile of enterprises that would engage. And over the last 2 years, as we've gone through this journey, I mean, we've gone further down that pyramid, right? We're not just at the tip of that pyramid, we're kind of going much further down as well across the globe. And now, I would say we're in that part of our customer journey where, we're selling to multiple people in the same organization, right? Multiple stakeholders, multiple champions across different functions, across, different goals across the organization. And this is across verticals as well. So across retail, healthcare, pharma, finance, and so on. So that's broadly where we are.
Thanks, Ashwini. I will come back to you with a few more questions on how to find the perfect fit and sell across verticals. But Praful, over to you. Do tell us a little bit about your journey and where you are on your journey.
Sure, Madhurima, thank you for having me. So we started in 2018, and what we wanted to do was to offer ready-to-use solutions to enterprises based on blockchain technology. Right? The first platform that we built was called Markets N, and it was a B2B digital supply chain platform, ready to use for companies to kind of bring together their supply chain and digitize them uh, as a cloud service. The second platform that we built was called Engagen, and this right now is seeing a lot of traction in the market, and it's the platform where brands can use NFTs to drive fan engagement and customer engagement. I think if I was to kind of compare the two journeys, we have enterprise customers in both cases. In the case of markets, and for example, we work with large manufacturers like Hindalco and MG Motors, and an international customer like MVL, and a small financing firm called Samunati. In the case of NFTs and Engagen, we work with Make My Trip, Spartan Poker, QV Creations, a media production house. So wide variety of customers that we have worked with. I think the key learning for us in our journey when working with enterprise customers is that when you are talking about new age technologies like blockchain and even AI, uh, blockchain is probably slightly behind the adoption curve than AI. There is definitely an element of education involved because there is no precedent of what you're asking your enterprise customer to do. And it requires a combination of education, it requires a combination of anecdotal evidence from around the world, and it requires a commitment on the enterprise side to be seen as a thought leader in this space. And if you kind of see all those three kind of coming together, that's when you really see adoption happening.
Great. Thanks for that, Prabhu. Ashwini, so you mentioned that you're cutting across verticals and you went across the common wisdom of focusing on one. So tell us a little bit, how was it, selling across verticals when you were early in your journey? And how did you overcome the challenges that this would have posed then?
So we were in cross vertical at the beginning. For the first 3 years, we were primarily retail, but we did go cross geo in the first 3 years, right? So we decided we will stay with one vertical before we expand, but we'll go cross geo. Now, very much like how Praful was saying, right? For us, we're talking 2015 as we were still building out our platform. We hadn't yet hit the market in any way. It was the same questions that we were asking ourselves, right? We were way ahead of the curve. People were not using image and video recognition systems anywhere at that point. And so we invested pretty heavily in things around marketing, right? Like product marketing, content marketing, building very, very meaningful communities, showing up in the right places, in the right conversations, right? And for us at that point, this meant showing up in Vogue, right? Because that's where fashion brands were looking at, or showing up in marketing conversations where very large grocery retailers were sitting at, right? So it meant showing up in the right places at the right time globally. And I say globally over and over again because it became very clear to us that, just given how early we were in the cycle, and I still remember at that point I was spending a lot of time reaching out to other founders, going like, how do you sell $100,000 $300,000 deal in SaaS? And that was non-existent at that point, right? Also within the country over here, there weren't too many stories of people doing 100 300 $500,000 deals using in a classic SaaS product kind of form. And so we had to take some very unconventional routes, right? And that meant giving up one geo and saying, no, let's try to look across multiple geos and pick the top 5 guys, right? So I think a big portion of the challenge for us around was about figuring out who those people were, right? And oftentimes that meant writing very personalized outreach, right, to all the different multiple people in the organization, identifying the kinds of enterprises that were already adopting new tech of whatever kind, right? So we'd be constantly reading up to see who is investing in what, where, identifying the right kind of champions and navigating organizations and taking the time to navigate organizations. This, whether it meant emails, whether it meant showing up at conferences, so much of it was a combination of, just putting ourselves out there to say, hey, this is what you can do, right? With a very ROI centric set of conversations to say, you can increase, your revenue, or you can save costs and become leaner, meaner, much more efficient, right? And being able to have a very analytics ROI led conversations around image recognition for us really helped us break through, right? And there was a steep education curve, like Praful was pointing out. Is we actually had to have demos of all kinds to show, hey, here's where this could integrate, here's what this could do for you, and almost like a rewiring of, you're changing behavior. That's what you're doing, right? And with enterprise, people hate changing behavior, right? Like large scale enterprises absolutely hate changing behavior. So it's very important to try and find the kind of champions that are charted with doing that. And the question always becomes, how do you make them succeed in that organization, right? How do you give them the ROI? How do you make them successful by adopting whatever it is that you're doing? And so I spent a significant amount of time trying to figure out and understand the kinds of companies in every geo. And then, at the end of the day, growth, right? If you put all your eggs in one basket and say, this is the only geo I'm going, like, you have no idea how it's going to work out, because it's a brand new category and we were writing the book on that category. And so it was a bit of a risky move in the first 3 years, but I truly think it paid off. Almost all of those folks that are with us today are multi-million dollar customers. And, it's a question of continuing to stay with them, growing with them, and letting them know that, you're there for them through the entire journey.
Thanks, Ashwini. That was a lot of great advice in that for companies which are working in the newer technologies. And, it's an example of how unconventional approaches can work. So be fearless and take the plunge. Thanks for that. Praful, Ashwini talked about, finding the champions. Let me ask you, you've been part of other startup programs by corporates, right? Do you think that was useful? Did that help in finding champions? What was your experience like?
No, I think the point on champions that Ashwini mentioned is absolutely spot on. To drive change inside such large organizations, you definitely need a champion. And the champion has to be senior enough to be able to influence change in the company. Now, given that, I think that is the role that the startup accelerators or the business startup programs are the best equipped to play, right? We have worked with about 3 or 4 different startup accelerators. And the place where we saw success in some places, we did not see success in other places. I think there are two key determinants of success for business startup programs and working with startup. One is alignment, right? Is the business which is selecting the startup going to make an impact in that business, right? I think if you have that, that's half the story. If you have a lack of alignment between the corporate which is running the accelerator program and what the startup is trying to accomplish, that's setting yourself up for failure. The second is, does the startup accelerator itself have the blessing of a CXO or a CXO minus one level champion? And are they participating actively in the startup program? Which goes back to the point that Ashwini was mentioning, which is that if you have alignment and if you have a champion which is senior enough, then the accelerator program will be able to drive success both for the corporate as well as the startup. If any one of those two things is not in place, then you have a problem.
Okay, thanks. India, as all of us have seen, there's been a rapid growth in the startup ecosystem, and today almost 40% of those startups are from the B2B space. And on the other side, we see a lot of corporates and other entities opening up these accelerator programs. So great advice there, Praful, because I think that that's a question foremost in every startup founder's mind when they get an invitation to join such a program. Is it the right one for me? So that's going to help them. Thanks for that. Now, it's been a great journey for both of you, as you have shared. Tried different stuff, got a lot of successes, some failures from which I'm sure you've pivoted and done different things. If you had to do it all over again, what would you change? And Ashwini, I'm going to invite you again.
What would I change? That's a really hard question. And the reason being, I mean, it's not like, as founders, you're already whipping yourself red, black, and blue for everything you pretty much do. So, I do a lot of things differently. Um, but no regrets. I don't know any other way to put it, right? I think the most important, I'm going to answer that question in a very different way here, right? I think that as founders, self-flagellation is the default part of our journey. We're not kind to ourselves at all. And I want to point out that so much of this journey is about making those mistakes, because there's no learning, there's no figuring out that there's an alternative path. And it's so, hindsight is, you can be brilliant in hindsight always, right? Like, but while you're going through that experience, I mean, nobody was building AI based systems the way we were building at that point, and I'm sure it's the case of with Praful as well, right? So in so many ways, when you choose to be that person at the forefront doing this for the first time, it is going to be bloody battle after bloody battle, right? I do not see it any other way. And so it's easy to look back in hindsight and say, oh yeah, I would have avoided that bloody battle, but hell no, I don't think any of us could have avoided it, given we were, the first ones to go in there and get beaten up and wounded. So at some level I want to say no, I don't think changing that story is, I think it's important for me to know where I failed, and all the things that we did wrong, and you know um, and the answer always is, could we have done one geo and focused? Probably. Would we have succeeded? I don't know. Could we have taken multiple vertical instead of one? Probably. Would we have succeeded? I don't know. So the reality, I think, is that I only know the journey I've had, right? And I don't know what would have happened had we made different choices, right? Because we've only made the choices we made and saw, and we've learned lessons going through it. But yeah, I don't know if that was a very convoluted answer, but I did want to bring that point out.
Yeah,
Personally,
that's
I loved that answer, Ashwini. I think, that's how it's in life. We don't know. There's a lot of what ifs, but instead of focusing on the what ifs, if we just are sure of we've given the best when we have and taken the right decision with the information we had, we should be happy. So great. I loved it. Thanks. Praful.
I kind of resonate with Ashwini. There is this new category of content that gets created, movies that get made, called historical fiction, right? And that's what you're asking us to do. You're asking us to write about historical fiction. I don't know what we could have done better, and whether it would have been better or not at all, right? But I think, and I'll tell you a lesson that I learned, and I still don't know whether I myself adhere to that lesson even today. I think there are some deals worth walking away from. It's the hardest thing to do, right? Especially when you have money on the table and there's a customer asking and you saying, no, we will not do this. It's one of the hardest things to do, especially when you are in a environment. I guess you have to be more confident to do this. I'm not saying I can do this today. I think I perhaps am making some of the mistakes as we speak, but it's a hard one, right? It fundamentally goes to what you envision the platform or your product to become in the future and what the market is asking you to do. At the heart of the question is, do you adapt the product to the market, or do you change the market to adapt to your product? As an entrepreneur, you always want to do the latter, but the market forces are too strong. So I, yeah, that's probably the thing that is the hardest thing to do.
Completely resonate with that too, Praful, right? Like and it's interesting, but there does come a point. I think there does come a point, and for us, we're actually going through this in our year 5, 6 now, where we're starting to see the sales team saying, and it's not even me, right? The sales team is beginning to say no and saying, I can't do it at this cost. I can't. And it's interesting because we've struggled with that exact same question. But I think there comes a time everybody just has to, just like with everything else, you stumble into it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's been a fantastic conversation, Ashwini and Praful. There's been some great insights, some learnings for me, a lot of reinforcements, and I think for all the founders out there who are listening to this, be fearless. Don't worry about being unconventional. You can hear all the advice, but follow what your heart tells you to. So I think that's great. I have one last question for both of you. Given that you're selling to enterprises, if you had one ask to enterprises, what would that be?
One ask, what? Can you say that again? One ask.
If you had an ask from the enterprises, anything that you want to ask your customers here about the behavior change or anything, what would that be?
Um, Ashwini, you want to go first? Okay, so I think um, for me, it is something that Ashwini briefly mentioned when she was speaking, and which is the willingness to drive change, right? And I use the word change very carefully. If I use the word innovation, everybody says, yes, we want to support innovation. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for change. right? Because innovation is the flashy new word. It gets support throughout the organization, but the willingness to adapt to new technology and change the way you do things today um, is perhaps the single biggest ask I would ask enterprises. Because for me, the biggest challenge in driving new technology adoption in enterprises is the inertia of status quo. Um, this is what we have always done. Uh, why not continue to stick with it? And I think that vision comes top down. As I said, unless you have the top management convinced, uh, technologies like AI and blockchain are not going to get into your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I second, third, fourth that. And to add to that, I think one thing that I would say is um, metrics driven approach to adoption, right? Numbers, analytics, ROI driven approach to adoption. I think there's a lot of excitement, whether it's blockchain or AI. There's an incredible amount of excitement in the industry, in the enterprise space. But there's also a lot of noise, in my opinion, right? Like, and it's very classic when you follow the hype cycle. We're in that period of like so much noise that I do find enterprises sometimes just struggling to, figure out what's going to float up, what's going to sink, what is the signal noise is a huge problem, I think, today in enterprise when it comes to new technologies, right? And one of the things that I'd love to see is a very ROI, numbers, analytics, outcome driven approach to adoption. And which means making some calls on build versus buy, right? I can't tell you the number of companies that I've come across that have chosen to build and then gone belly up, right? Startups in the early and growth stage that just like, you have to do your business. Like, what are you doing building in, a data science team or a team that's building, working on innovation or anything that, in that category. And so I think the minute you have an outcome and an ROI based approach to adoption of anything new that's supposed to provide, some kind of an exponential ROI to the team, having that hat on and being relentless about looking at that and understanding that, to me, I think can also help bring about the change, the kind of change that Praful was talking about. So that's kind of would be my ask.
Thank you. I would love to go on with this conversation, but given the time that we have, we'll take a pause and hope to see more of you, Ashwini and Praful, and wish you continued success. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.